The alien princess thought she was gay, until she met the human. He steps into the cell where the lights flicker against metallic walls, his posture rigid, eyes narrowed. She is seated, spine straight, as though the very chair is a throne. For a moment, neither moves, neither speaks, locked in a silent assessment of the other, every breath charged with unspoken challenge. "Is this truly the best your forces can manage?" she says in a low, lilting voice that carries the barest edge of a sneer. The words land like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he tilts his head, taking her measure. Her wrists are bound with restraints that glow faintly whenever she tenses, technology designed to subdue powerful alien captives. But even shackled, she exudes a lethal calm. He finally shrugs, stepping closer until there is scarcely a foot of space between them. She tries to hide any hint of reaction. He catches the subtle flare of her nostrils, the parted lips that suggest she's not as in control as she wants him to believe. He leans in, voice quiet. "You might want to choose your words carefully, princess. The ones holding you aren't known for patience." His emphasis on the last word makes her pupils contract. She doesn't flinch, though, and he feels a reluctant surge of admiration at her poise. She arches a brow, a flicker of pearlescent light tracing her collarbones. "Then they should try harder if they expect me to cower." Her voice resonates, with an otherworldly timbre that vibrates in his chest. He forces himself not to shift, not to let her see that her voice has any effect on him. On the surface, she's the picture of confidence, wearing a regal gown that was stripped of most ornate pieces when she was captured. What remains is torn and dusty, highlighting the tension in every muscle along her arms and shoulders. She's tall, almost his height, and that alone is unsettling given her delicate features and pointed ears. The slender wrists, the graceful curve of her neck, all speak of fragility. But the eyes bright with challenge betray a warrior's spirit. He steps back as the guard behind him hovers, waiting for a command. "Leave us," he tells the guard, not looking away from her. There's a moment's hesitation. The guard knows the prisoner is dangerous, but Kieran outranks the soldier. With a nod, the guard retreats, and the cell door grinds shut with a metallic thud, leaving them alone. She shifts in her chair, the restraints clinking, the slight hum from the power generator in the walls, highlighting the stark emptiness of the cell. He crosses his arms over his broad chest and considers her for another beat of silence. "Are you comfortable, princess?" His tone is flat, but there's an underlying taunt. She barks a short laugh, the chains rattling when she lifts her hands. "Comfort is the least of my concerns," she says, voice dropping in pitch. "I want to know what you plan to do with me." He stares her down, letting the tension simmer. "Depends on what you're willing to tell us." He raises a brow at her silence, then continues. "You claim you're the rightful heir to an empire that's at war with humanity. My superiors see you as a bargaining chip, a muscle in..." His jaw flexes. "I see you as trouble." Her lips quirk into a half smile. "You have no idea how much trouble, human." The last word lands with a deliberate flick of disdain. She shifts again, testing the cuffs, but they hold. "Since you are obviously the brute in charge of my interrogation, I'd like to make a request. Stop wasting my time." He almost laughs at her brazen confidence. Instead, his mouth curves into that slow, dangerous smirk he's known for. "All right, Erental, let's not waste time." She stills at the sound of her name. "So you do know who I am?" He nods. "I do. The question is what you're worth to me or to them. I lost good men in raids orchestrated by your empire. I have a personal stake in this, princess." She leans forward until the faint glow under the chains intensifies. "I also have my reasons for hating your kind." Her voice pitches lower, that barely perceptible vibration that resonates in his bones. "But I suspect you want something else from me." He shrugs. "What I want is straightforward, intel. Maybe you'll give it voluntarily, or maybe I'll have to pry it out of you. I've got the means and the authority." He tilts his head, letting the smirk fade. "You might want to reconsider your attitude." Her eyes flash, the glow at her collarbones pulsing with her heartbeat. "Spare me your threats. This entire facility will collapse in on you if I decide I'm done playing your game." He lifts a brow. "You sound confident, but you're bound, princess. So let's start with..." Alarms cut through the air before he can finish. Red lights strobe in the corridor, and the heavy door behind him rattles as an explosion somewhere in the facility sends a shockwave through the walls. Erental seizes that moment, surging to her feet. The restraints hold, forcing her to grit her teeth in frustration, but she doesn't cry out. Her reaction is purely predatory, scanning the environment for weaknesses. Kieran curses Underkey, his breath, stepping forward to press a command on the side of her cuffs. They snap open with a hiss. He needs her mobile if they're under attack. A half-chained princess might be the difference between them dying here and making it out alive. She immediately rubs her wrists, eyes narrowing as she tests her newfound freedom. "You trust me enough to release me?" she asks, voice dripping with irony. He shakes his head, hand poised near the weapon at his hip. "No, but I can't have you useless if we've got to fight." Another explosion rocks the corridor, and he yanks her arm. "We're leaving, now." She almost resists out of sheer defiance, but then tilts her head as a chunk of the ceiling falls, dust and debris scattering. "Fine," she breathes, voice throaty with adrenaline, "but don't slow me down." They push into the hallway, the overhead lights flickering. Guards sprint past, shouting orders into comm devices that crackle with static. Her gaze sweeps over the frantic humans, and she lifts her chin in a silent assertion of her royal bearing. She could slip away in the chaos, Kieran realizes. He keeps a firm hold on her arm, but the part of him that's fought too many battles, and knows he can't watch her every second. They round a corner and find a group of armed intruders cutting through a sealed door with a plasma torch. Erental's eyes narrow at the insignia on their uniforms. "Assassins," she snarls. "They're here for me." Kieran gestures for her to get behind him, but she jerks free, stepping forward with a fluid grace that's as startling as it is impressive. The intruders notice them, and in that heartbeat, Kieran sees the flicker of fear crossing their faces when they catch sight of the alien princess. She extends a hand, a faint shimmer swirling around her fingertips. He doesn't fully understand her abilities, but he's heard rumors, illusions, or perhaps an energy manipulation. The corridor dims like the air is being pulled inward, and two of the intruders stagger as though disoriented. Kieran uses the moment to lunge, drawing his sidearm and firing 3 quick shots. One of the assassins goes down with a grunt, the other is clipped in the shoulder. Erental's energy flickers out as a stray blast from an assassin's rifle nearly clips her. She dodges, hair swinging in a dark arc, and Kieran sees a flicker of that luminous glow creeping across her arms. She might not be a typical soldier, but she's dangerous. With a snarl, she charges the remaining assassin, disarming him with a swift move that twists his wrist at an angle that makes him cry out. Kieran doesn't have time to be impressed, because more intruders are pouring into the corridor. He grabs her wrist. "They'll overwhelm us if we stay. Move!" She doesn't hesitate now. Survival instincts trump her arrogance. They run down the corridor, bypassing locked doors and stepping over debris. She glances at him mid-sprint, catching the determined set of his jaw. "Who's attacking this facility?" He spares her a quick look. "Could be a rival human faction or mercs hired by your empire to kill you before you talk." Her laugh is harsh, breathless. "My empire won't pay for my death, but they'd pay for my silence." A bitterness seeps into her tone. "They'd rather see me dead than risk what I might reveal." His mind snaps to the rumor that she's more than just a princess. She might know secrets that could topple her mother's regime. Maybe that's why she was so valuable. He doesn't respond, reserving his energy for escaping. Another explosion rattles the floors as they dash into a wide atrium lined with tall metal pillars. The roof is partially collapsed, letting in smoky light. Bodies of soldiers and assassins alike are strewn around, wounded or worse. Erental's eyes sweep the scene, and she lifts her chin, something imperious returning to her stance. "Find me a weapon." She doesn't phrase it like a request. He raises a brow at her commanding tone but hands her a spare blade from a fallen guard. She grips it with a confidence that belies familiarity. "Stay close," she orders, as though she is in charge. He almost barks a laugh. Instead, he grabs her by the elbow and steers her behind a pillar as a fresh volley of plasma fire erupts from the far side of the atrium. Sparks fly, the acrid smell of scorched metal filling the air. They share a quick glance. She might not like him, but in this moment, they're forced allies. Her glare says she doesn't appreciate being manhandled, but she doesn't resist, as he pulls her down, shielding her from the crossfire. He peeks around the pillar, returning fire at the attackers, a band of 6 or 7 wearing dark armor with tinted visors. They're methodical, trying to corner them. He looks at her, notices the glow intensifying around her collarbones, the faint flush in her cheeks. Her breath is ragged, but her eyes remain sharp. "We need an exit," he says, scanning the area. A corridor to the west might still be intact. "Keep them busy for 3 seconds." She nods, pressing her back against the pillar, blade held low. He steels himself, then darts out, firing a salvo that forces the attackers to take cover. She pivots around the other side of the pillar, tossing something from her belt, a small device that flashes bright an alien flare. It emits a blinding luminescence that sends the group staggering. Kieran seizes the moment, sprinting across the open space. She follows, her movements fluid despite the debris. They slip into a side hallway as the flash dissipates and the attackers regain their vision. One tries to give chase, but Kieran fires twice, forcing the man to drop. The corridor leads to the facility's loading bay, massive cargo doors that, with luck, might still open. She pauses to catch her breath as he hurries to the control panel, inputting a security code. The bay doors creak in protest, only partially, opening. Through the gap they see the smoky exterior, fires raging in the compound beyond. He curses softly. "We'll have to slide under." She eyes the narrow opening. "You first," she says, voice dripping with suspicion. He's about to argue but realizes that if he goes first, she might flee in the opposite direction. He also knows she might stab him in the back, but they have no time to debate. The pounding of boots echoes behind them. Without a word, he drops to the ground, rolling underneath the half-open door. She follows a heartbeat later, the back of her dress snagging on the jagged metal. He reaches for her, pulling her free, the two tumbling out into an open courtyard where black smoke billows from toppled machinery. The stench of burnt metal and ozone saturates the air. Coughing, she rips the ruined fabric from her sleeve to free her arm. A blast from inside the bay door signals the attackers have found them. He grabs her hand and pulls her behind a toppled cargo rover. She yanks free as soon as they have cover. "I don't need you to drag me everywhere," she snaps, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with fury. He sets his jaw. "I'm trying to keep us both alive." The retort hangs in the air as more blasts scorch the ground around them, leaving molten craters. They peer over the edge of the rover, spotting half a dozen attackers fanning out. The facility is compromised. If they stay, they'll be surrounded. She gives him a sideways glance. "I know a place we can go, but you won't like it." "Does it involve getting the hell away from here?" he asks, breath coming fast. She nods, and for a moment he sees a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Then lead the way, princess." She grimaces at the word, but doesn't correct. Him. Together they slink around the cargo rover, stepping over wreckage until they spot a side gate blasted open. Smoke obscures the view beyond, but it's less guarded. With a silent signal, they sprint across open ground, ignoring the stinging swirl of ash in the air. Plasma bolts zip past, but none find their mark. An explosion rips through the courtyard, behind them, throwing them forward. He catches himself on one knee, but she stumbles, nearly falling. Instinctively, his hand lashes out, catching her arm. She exhales sharply, the glow at her collarbones shimmering with sudden intensity. He looks at her, feeling that surge of adrenaline and something else, an electric undercurrent that resonates between them. She snatches her arm away, lips parted, as though to snarl, but all she manages is a quiet, trembling breath. They lock eyes for a single heartbeat, tension roaring beneath the chaos around them. Then he jerks his head toward the exit. "Move!" They find themselves in a maze of charred alleyways, once part of the facility's supply chain. The overhead lights have gone dark, leaving only emergency beacons that cast red, pulsing shadows against the walls. She guides him deeper into the warren of corridors, ignoring the shouting from behind. He stays vigilant, scanning for threats. They come upon a thick automated door at the end of one corridor, flickering with partial power. She taps a code, into an alien keypad. It denies her with a beep. She curses softly, tries another sequence. The door shudders, then slides open just enough for them to squeeze through. Inside is an old docking bay with a small craft that looks battered but possibly functional. It was hidden here, she murmurs, crossing to the vessel with quick strides. Part of my contingency plan if I needed to escape. He eyes the sleek lines of the alien ship, which has a dull metallic sheen. It's cramped, but it might fly. You had an escape route even when captured, he snorts softly. You really did plan for every possibility. She presses a button on the side of the hatch, but it doesn't open. The power is drained. Help me, she snaps, gesturing to a manual override. He yanks at the lever, muscles straining, until with a groan of metal, the hatch pops open. The inside of the craft is dark, no sign of power. She slides into the pilot's seat, flipping switches. Nothing happens. He climbs in after her, heart hammering. We're sitting ducks if this thing doesn't start. He glimpses movement in the corridor behind them, silhouettes approaching. We've got company. She frowns, pressing her palm to a biometric scanner that flickers erratically. It's partially offline. Frustration laces her voice. The external generator must be damaged. He glances around, spots a set of cables. We might be able to reroute power from that panel. He squeezes past her, the cramped cockpit forcing them into aggravating proximity. She's all sharp, lines and regal bearing, even with her hair tangled, her gown torn. He can almost feel the heat of her body, and he fights an unexpected pulse of awareness. She says nothing, but he senses the tension in the way her breath catches. He yanks open a maintenance panel, rummaging for a junction. Give me a second. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps grows louder. She steps out, blade in hand, positioning herself at the hatch. They're here, she hisses. He locates the right circuit, splices wires, and a dim glow washes over the cockpit. Lights flicker to life on the console. She leaps back into the pilot's seat. He climbs into the co-pilot area, crouching, scanning the corridor. The first intruder appears, helmet visor reflecting the flickering interior lights. He levels a rifle. Kieran fires first, a precise shot that hits center mass. The intruder goes down, but more approach. Erental tries the ignition sequence. The ship sputters, engines whining. She snarls a curse in her own language, slamming a control lever. He keeps firing at the corridor, forcing the attackers to retreat behind corners. At last, the engines roar to life and the craft vibrates as it hovers a few inches off the ground. She hits a switch that closes the hatch, sealing them inside. Bullets and plasma blasts ricochet off the hull. Kieran braces himself as she punches the throttle. The ship lurches forward, smashing through the remains of the door. Metal screams. Then they burst into the open night sky, leaving behind the flames and chaos of the facility. He sags back against the wall, adrenaline leaving him shaky. She keeps her hands on the controls, dark eyes fixed on the horizon. Smoke trails swirl below them, the facility quickly shrinking behind a veil of darkness. For a few moments, the only sounds are the hum of the engines and their labored breathing. She doesn't speak. He doesn't push her. They've escaped, but the tension remains thick. Finally, she exhales. We're not safe yet. She adjusts the controls, setting a new course. I need to find a place to land. This craft is damaged. He drags himself into the co-pilot seat, scanning the console. The readouts are in her language, but some symbols are familiar enough. Engine temperature, altitude, hull integrity, everything is in the red. We have about half power, he mutters, mostly to himself. Where can we put down without getting ambushed? She seems to hesitate. He can almost see the gears turning in her head. There's a location near the outskirts of this planet's polar region, sparse population, remote. We might hide there for a short time, make repairs. He shakes his head. It won't be safe if your own people are after you, not to mention any human factions that want you dead. She tosses him a glare. I never claimed it would be safe, but it's our best chance. She pauses, eyes flicking to him. Unless you have a better suggestion, soldier. He draws a breath, feeling the weight of the situation. She's right, they're out of immediate danger, but it's a temporary reprieve. Fine, he says, turning his attention to the sensors, ensuring no immediate pursuers are on their tail. Take us there. She nods, inputting coordinates. The ship banks sharply. He notices how she sets her jaw, a subtle sign of strain. He wonders if she's in pain or just furious at the day's events. His squad's gone, his chain of command in tatters, and the only ally he has now is the deadly alien princess he was supposed to interrogate. He does a quick mental inventory of the sidearm at his waist. Half a clip left. The tension in his gut refuses to ease. He glances sidelong at her. She stares straight ahead, posture rigid, the faint glow at her collarbones dimming as her adrenaline subsides. Despite everything, there's a magnetism about her that he can't ignore. Even as battered as she is, there's an aura of regality, a confidence that crackles in the air between them. He quickly forces his gaze away, focusing on the readouts, burying any hint of attraction under the practicality of survival. She broke from her own empire, declared herself an enemy to humanity. He'd be a fool to trust her. Sparks fly from a flickering console overhead, and she frowns, tapping at it. Might have to cut life support if the engines keep overheating, she mutters. He grimaces. At least the atmosphere outside is breathable. We can handle that for a while. She huffs a humorless laugh. Human environment is hardly hospitable for me, but I'll manage. She manipulates a dial, redirecting power. A panel behind them emits a sizzling pop and goes dark. She curses. Hold it together, she whispers to the craft, almost reverent. She might be speaking to herself, too. They fly in tense silence, the planet's surface illuminated by moonlight. He tries not to stare, but every so often, his gaze drifts to her profile. She senses it, throwing him a sharp look each time, daring him to speak. He doesn't, and the hush stretches on, broken only by the ship's labored hum. Eventually, her posture sags a fraction, exhaustion creeping in. He can see the trembling in her hands as she steadies the controls. He considers offering help, but the memory of her scorn still lingers. She's proud, used to commanding. If she wants help, she'll ask, or so he tells himself. The truth is, he's not sure how to handle this alliance. They want each other alive, but for how long? Until one of them decides the other is a liability. With a subtle flick of her wrist, she starts descent procedures. The northern horizon is a swirl of pale lights, auroras dancing across the sky. She aims for a patch of land near frozen plains, ringed by jagged mountains. As they approach, the sensors crackle, indicating pockets of electromagnetic interference, possibly from natural phenomena. She fights the controls, sweat beading on her temples. It's a rough landing, the ship jolting and skidding over icy ground before coming to rest against a boulder, with a crunch of metal. He's thrown forward, slamming a shoulder into the cockpit console, muttering a curse. She manages to stay in the pilot's seat, but he hears her grunt. The engines wind down, stuttering into an uneasy silence. Outside, snow-whipped winds batter. The hull, the temperature gauge dropping fast. She sighs, letting her head fall back against the seat. "We made it," she says, almost to herself. Then, as if remembering his presence, she glances at him. "Get up. We need to see how bad the damage is." He rolls his shoulder, testing for injuries. It hurts, but nothing's broken. "Fine," he mutters, standing. She moves to open the hatch. A blast of frigid air sweeps in, making her shiver, but she steels herself, stepping outside. The snow crunches underfoot, and he follows, breath misting in the cold. He surveys the battered hull. One engine intake is crushed, and some fluid sears leaking onto the snow, hissing in the freezing air. She crouches near the damage, hand skimming the surface. "We'll need parts to fix this," she says, brow furrowed. "Parts we don't have, parts we can't replicate in human territory." He presses his lips into a thin line, scanning the endless stretch of ice. "So we're stuck here?" "For now," she says, standing. The wind whips her hair across her face and she brushes it aside. Her gown, tattered as it is, offers little warmth, and a tremor runs through her. It's the first sign of vulnerability he's seen. But maybe not forever. If we can get communications up, we can reach someone. He stiffens. "Who? Your empire?" She gives him a look that could cut steel. "I might prefer solitary. Exile to calling them, but you can't contact your humans either, can you?" She narrows her eyes. "You think they'll welcome me?" He exhales, eyes on the swirling snow. "You've got a point." He steps closer, crossing his arms to keep warm. We need shelter. The ship might protect us from the elements for a while, but the temperature's going to drop even further at night. She reluctantly nods. Inside, we can ration what's left of the power, maybe keep the cabin barely livable. She glances around, scanning the horizon with an almost predatory gaze. He wonders if she's looking for threats or possible allies. "Let's go," she mutters, turning back to the hatch. Inside the craft, she initiates a partial lockdown to conserve heat. The interior is cramped, forcing them uncomfortably close. They move around each other warily, like two predators sharing a cage. She retrieves a small device from a compartment under the console, a scanning tool that hums softly as she checks external atmospheric readings. He settles into the co-pilot seat, rolling the stiffness from his neck. "So what now?" She looks at him, eyes shadowed with fatigue. Wait. The storm might pass in a day or two. After that, we can assess if there's any settlement nearby." She sets the scanner aside, crossing her arms over her chest. The tattered fabric of her gown reveals the faint glow along her collarbones, pulsing in subtle waves with every breath. It's hard not to notice. He clears his throat. "I'll take first watch. You should rest." She tenses, clearly unaccustomed to taking orders from him, but exhaustion wins out. "Fine," she says coolly, turning to find a corner of the cabin where she can sit. She positions herself with her back against the wall, arms draped over her knees, gaze never fully leaving him. He busies himself checking the console for damage, ignoring the uneasy knot in his stomach. Hours ago, he was her captor. Now they're reluctant allies in a life-or-death situation. She closes her eyes but doesn't fully sleep. She's too dangerous to let him out of her sight, and he's too untrustworthy in her mind. He sees her eyelids flutter, though, betraying the toll the day has taken. In the soft hum of the failing cabin lights, he watches her for a moment. Her face is schooled into a guarded expression, yet there's a vulnerability in the slight crease between her brows. For a moment, he wonders who she is beneath that regal armor of pride. He forces himself to turn away. The fact that he's even curious is a liability. She's an alien princess from a warring empire, and the only reason they aren't at each other's throats right now is because they need each other to survive. He resolves to stay alert, to keep his focus on the swirling storm outside. The wind howls across the hull, and each time it does, the tension in the cabin seems to deepen. In the flickering half-light, Kieran feels a subtle pull toward her, something more profound than mere proximity. She's proven herself lethal, cunning, and unwavering in her convictions. She's also proven that she's not naive or easily broken. A grudging respect stirs in him, battling with the memory of lost comrades, the ghosts of his vendetta against her people. He tries to bury that respect, to cling to the anger that fueled him for so long. Hours crawl by in near silence, punctuated only by the soft rasp of her breathing and the creak of the hull settling under the storm's onslaught. Eventually, the cabin temperature drops another few degrees, and his breath starts to fog. She stirs, murmuring something in her sleep. He moves closer to check on the console's readouts, accidentally brushing the back of her arm with his leg. Her eyes snap open and she stiffens, as if expecting an attack. He takes a step back, hands up in a placating gesture. "I was just—" he begins, but she cuts him off. "Don't sneak up on me," she says, voice raw with fatigue. She tries to mask how tired she is, but he hears it. He nods once, returning to the console. "We're losing heat faster than expected. We might need to huddle in the cockpit for warmth." The suggestion hangs awkwardly between them. Her posture stiffens, and he can practically see her pride, bristling at the idea of depending on him for body heat. "I'll manage," she says curtly, but a shiver betrays her words. She closes her eyes again, jaw clenched, forcing herself to ignore the cold. He hesitates, unsure whether to press her. Ultimately, he decides not to push. Instead, he rummages through a storage compartment and pulls out a small thermal blanket, tossing it at her feet. She glances at it, and then at him, lips parted in surprise. Her expression wavers between reluctant gratitude and stubborn refusal. Without a word, she snatches the blanket and drapes it over her shoulders. He returns to monitoring the console, the silence resuming a tense hold over them. Outside, the storm intensifies, wind howling like a wounded beast. Inside, they are forced to be near each other in an uneasy truce. Eventually, despite her attempt to stay awake, she dozes again. He keeps his vigil, occasionally powering up the ship's external sensors to scan for any sign of pursuit. There's nothing but the storm, miles of ice, and the threat of the unknown. Even if enemies are out there, no sane force would dare approach in these conditions. Time stretches, and his own exhaustion weighs heavy. The adrenaline has long since ebbed, leaving him with the dull ache of battered muscles. He shifts his weight, blinking gritty eyes. She stirs once more, readjusting. The blanket, the glow along her collarbone a faint flicker. He tries not to stare, tries not to wonder about the intricacies of her physiology, like how that glow might respond to emotion or how that mesmerizing voice of hers resonates. Pushing the thoughts aside, he focuses on survival. If the storm doesn't kill them, and they manage to fix the ship, there's still the question of what happens next. Eventually, he leans back against the console, letting out a slow breath, her eyes open, watching him. "How long have I been out?" "A couple of hours," he answers, voice low. She shifts under the blanket, rubbing at her eyes. He sees the sharp intelligence behind them once again. "Any activity?" He shakes his head. "Storm's too fierce. No one's coming for us right now." She nods, tugging the blanket tighter. Her gaze drifts to the readouts. "We'll need supplies soon. Food, water." She hesitates, then continues quietly. "The temperature will only drop further as night falls." He considers the implications. "Then we might need to move on foot, find some natural shelter, or the remains of any outpost that once existed here." He rubs the back of his neck, feeling the tension coil. But traveling in this weather could be suicidal. She closes, her eyes calculating. "We'll wait until the storm abates, maybe tomorrow." There's a beat of silence. She looks at him, something unspoken in her gaze. "You should rest too. We're not out of danger, but you're no good to me half dead." From exhaustion, he's tempted to argue, but fatigue presses heavy on him. He nods, sliding down to the floor, leaning his head against the bulkhead. She keeps her back to the wall, watching him as he drifts toward a light doze. It's an uneasy ceasefire. Two formidable warriors forced to rely on each other. In the hush of the failing ship, their breathing sinks, each unwilling to let the other out of sight. He tries to keep himself awake, to remain vigilant, but the day's chaos weighs him down. Snatches of sleep come in fits, haunted by memories of the ambush, the screams of his comrades, the twisted wreckage. Each time he jolts awake, he sees her eyes on him, unwavering. For her part, she says nothing. Neither does he. When the storm eventually subsides hours later, they're both on edge, battered by cold and fatigue. She stands, forcing stiffness out of her limbs. Her hair is matted, the once ornate gown stained and torn, yet she carries herself with the quiet grace of royalty. He pushes to his feet, muscles protesting. Their gazes lock, and for a moment there's a spark of mutual respect. They survived the night without killing each other, or succumbing to the environment. It might be the first step of something that feels dangerously like trust. They exchange no pleasantries. She simply says, "We should go." And he silently agrees. Outside, the world is a frozen wasteland bathed in pale morning light. Jagged formations of ice rise like silent sentinels, and the wind, though calmer, still whips loose snow across the plains. They gather what little gear they have, his sidearm, her blade, a portable scanner, the thermal blanket. The ship's hull is coated in a layer of frost, the metal groaning as temperatures shift. She glances at him. "We won't survive out here for long without a plan." He nods curtly. "Let's see if there's any structure or cave system nearby. Maybe we can hole up, find a place to keep warm." She doesn't argue, falling into step beside him, the snow crunching under their boots. There's an uneasy tension in the air, a question unasked. What happens when they're no longer forced to rely on each other? Will they turn on each other, or has something shifted in the chaos of shared survival? She extends the handheld scanner, turning in a slow circle. The device emits a series of beeps indicating a weak energy signature to the northwest. She narrows her eyes at the screen. Could be an abandoned mining facility, she murmurs. Or it might be wreckage, hard to say. Either way, it's worth checking, he says, studying the endless white horizon. Their breath steams in the bitter cold. We won't last another night in that ship. She turns her gaze to him, that regal bearing never fully leaving her stance. Then let's go, she says, her voice steady, the authority in her tone undeniable. He inclines his head, letting her take the lead. They trudge through the snow in silence at first, listening to the echo of their footsteps. She walks with a lithe efficiency, even in the difficult terrain, never faltering. Every so often he notices the slight glow returning to her collarbones, as if her body reacts to the environment. He wonders if she's generating extra warmth, or if it's merely an involuntary response. He stops himself from asking, not wanting, to betray any curiosity. As they press on, the sun climbs higher, reflecting blindingly off the ice. She shields her eyes, scanning for any sign of movement. The device in her hand beeps intermittently, guiding them over ridges and around chasms. The altitude seems to be increasing and the air is thinner. He feels it in his lungs, the cold burning his throat. She appears affected too, pausing occasionally to steady her breathing. They crest a steep incline, and below them lies a massive cavern entrance carved into the ice, rimmed by natural pillars. The scanner spikes, indicating residual energy inside. She lifts it in triumph. There, she says, already moving down. He follows, carefully placing each step on the slippery slope. Inside the cavern, the temperature is marginally higher. Stalactites of ice cling to the ceiling, and the walls shimmer with a faint blue glow as if capturing the daylight from outside. They move deeper until they find what looks like a collapsed tunnel. Twisted metal beams protrude from the ice, suggesting an ancient mining structure. She kneels, running her hand along the metal. Definitely old human tech, she notes, from a previous war, maybe decades past. He nods, which means there might be leftover supplies or a generator if we're lucky. They press, on stepping over rubble. The air here is still almost suffocating, with a faint echo of dripping water in the distance. He clicks on a small flashlight, the beam illuminating more of the broken corridor. Every few steps she checks the scanner, guiding them to where the reading is strongest. Eventually they stumble upon a section that's partially intact, with walls that were once reinforced. A heavy blast door stands ajar, revealing a room beyond. They slip inside, weapons at the ready. The space resembles an old storage bay, the floor littered with debris and rusted crates. An overhead light fixture flickers erratically, suggesting some residual power. She swiftly crosses to a console embedded in the wall, trying to fire it up. The screen crackles, and though most text is unreadable, there's a flicker of life. Looks like an auxiliary generator is still operational somewhere, she murmurs. It's minimal, but maybe enough to keep this place from collapsing. He nods, scanning the crates. Most are empty or filled with decades-old junk, but he finds a battered container with a few emergency supplies, dehydrated rations, a damaged med kit. He also locates an ancient portable heater. We might be able to rig this to the generator, he says, tossing it to her. She catches it, turning it over in her hands. It's primitive, but if we can route some power to it'll keep us from freezing. They set to work, clearing a small area of debris and hooking up the heater to a cable running from the flickering console. Within minutes, a faint warmth begins to spread from the device. She stretches her hands toward it, lips parting in a sigh of relief. He does the same, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly as the chill recedes. They take stock of their resources. The rations are scarce, but enough to last a couple of days if they conserve. Water can be melted from the ice around them. The real question is what to do next. She glances at him, hair falling in loose strands. Around her face, that regal veneer slightly cracked by exhaustion. Now we wait and repair, she says. He nods, settling onto the floor near the heater. The day's march has taken its toll on both of them. She lowers herself beside him, careful to maintain a sliver of distance. In the dim glow of the heater, they sit in weary silence. His gaze drifts to her again, noticing the faint aura shimmering at her skin's surface. He tries to focus on anything else, on the twisted metal beams overhead, on the faint hum of the generator, but each time his attention strays back to her. She seems to feel it, shifting under his scrutiny. "What?" she snaps, though the edge in her voice is dulled by fatigue. He shrugs, looking away. "Just making sure you're not about to stab me in my sleep." She almost smiles, a dark twist of her lips. "If I wanted to, I'd have done it while you dozed back in the ship." He meets her gaze. There's a sudden intensity in the air, crackling between them. They've survived together, fought side by side, but they remain adversaries in many ways. Still, the line has blurred. He swallows, unable to entirely dismiss the spark that flares whenever they clash. She breaks eye contact first, turning to warm her hands against the heater. "We have at most 2 days before either your people or mine track us here," she says, more to herself than him. "I need to figure out how to get that ship running again or find some other way off this planet." He tilts his head, considering her. "Why not just hail your empire? Wouldn't they come for you, princess?" She doesn't flinch at the title this time, but her lips tighten. "They'd come for me, yes, but not for rescue. I can't trust them." A flicker of pain shadows her expression. "My mother has made it clear that my life is expendable if it means preserving the Empire's secrets." Her candid admission surprises him. He's silent for a moment, uncertain how to respond. She glances at him, reading the question in his eyes. She shrugs. "Politics," she says, voice thick with bitterness. Her illusions of loyalty end where power is threatened. He exhales softly. "I know the feeling," he mutters. She raises a questioning brow. He shifts uncomfortably, but offers no details, letting the moment pass. Instead, he states, "We'll fix the ship ourselves or find a different craft. Then we'll part ways." She narrows her eyes, as though trying to gauge his sincerity. "Yes," she agrees, voice neutral. Neither of them mentions what might happen if they can't repair the ship or if they're found first. For now, they need each other. They settle into a routine of sorts, scanning for resources, exploring the cavern's network of corridors, and salvaging what they can from old machinery. When fatigue sets in, they huddle back in the makeshift shelter near the heater. Tension simmers in every shared glance, every brush of shoulders as they navigate narrow passages. Yet there's an undeniable growing pull between them, like two magnets fighting to resist contact, only to be drawn closer with each forced partnership moment. She constantly tests his limits, barking orders, making demands. He meets her challenges with a calm, unyielding resolve. Each confrontation feels like a form of sparring, the clash of wills as potent as any battle. Her eyes spark with annoyance and something akin to intrigue when he refuses to bow to her commands. She's used to subservience from men, especially humans, but he's not about to serve anyone's agenda blindly ever again. During one search for salvage, she opens a rusted door only to find a collapsed tunnel on the other side. As she turns to leave, the floor gives way beneath her. She drops into a hidden shaft, letting out a startled cry. He lunges forward, grabbing her wrist just in time. She dangles precariously, a drop of unknown depth below her. For a second, the only sound is her ragged breath, the chain of their clasped hands taut. He braces himself, pulling her up. It's a strain. She's not light, and the floor beneath him is crumbling. She kicks against the air, gritting her teeth. Their eyes meet as he uses all his strength to haul her back onto solid ground. She collapses onto her knees, panting, the glow at her collarbones flaring with her pounding heartbeat. They stare at each other for a taut moment. Her lips part, but no words come. Instead, she inhales, closes her eyes, then regains her composure. She stands, brushing herself off. "Thank you," she mutters, voice clipped. He just nods, breath still heavy from the effort. They continue in silence, the near disaster hanging between them like a phantom. Later, as they regroup in their small shelter, he notices her rubbing her wrist. Without thinking, he reaches for her, pausing inches away. She arches a brow but doesn't pull back. Gently, he takes her arm, examining a faint bruise from where he'd gripped her. She watches him with wary curiosity, but he merely releases her hand after a moment, saying nothing. No confessions, no apology, just a shared awareness of the bond forged in that moment of crisis. The day bleeds into night again, the cavern lit only by the dying flicker of the overhead light and the orange glow of the heater's element. The temperature dips, and they draw closer to the warmth, tension thick enough to taste. She shifts, trying to maintain a respectful distance, but the small space forces them side by side. He can feel the heat radiating from her body, contrasting with the chill in the air. She looks at him, lips parted as if to speak, but then she snaps her mouth shut. He raises a brow. "What?" Her eyes narrow. "You really don't fear me at all, do you?" He exhales a short, humorless laugh. "I've seen too many horrors in war to be afraid of one princess, no matter how alien." Their gazes lock, and he feels that electric tension coil in the pit of his stomach. She leans closer as if testing him. He holds his ground, ignoring the sudden pounding of his pulse. "I thought I knew my preferences," she murmurs, almost to herself. "But you're different than the others. Your people, your men." She trails off, confusion flickering over her features. He says nothing, letting her words hang in the air. She looks away, a faint flush coloring her cheeks, though it might be from the heater. He knows better than to push. Instead, he looks out at the cavern's yawning mouth. "Tomorrow we try to make contact with the outside, see if we can salvage anything else. The day after we check on the storm. Then we fix that ship if possible." She nods, the conversation dropped but not forgotten. Sleep comes fitfully for both of them, minds buzzing with unspoken questions. The next day, they scour deeper, into the mining complex, finding a partially intact comm station. Though ancient, it could be repurposed. She sets to work on it with a determined focus, occasionally barking at him to pass a tool or hold a wire. He does so without complaint, the two moving in sync out of necessity. As hours pass, the tension transforms into a kind of synergy. She unravels the alien-coded scripts that plague the station's interface, while he handles the more mundane mechanical tasks. They argue frequently, each confrontation laced with the heady undercurrent of attraction neither fully acknowledges. He sees how her eyes flash when he challenges her, how the glow at her collarbones intensifies whenever their voices rise. She sees how his gaze never wavers, how his calm meets her fiery spirit head-on. When they finally manage to power the comm station, it sputters, flickering with a weak signal. She tries cycling frequencies, but static is all they get. She curses, in frustration, hands gripping the console. The moment mirrors the tension between them, so much potential, all bound up in obstacles they can't easily overcome. That night, they return to the heater, each settling in for another cold vigil. Their rations are nearly gone, water is running low, and the possibility of rescue or sabotage looms. He adjusts the heater's settings, his fingers numb from rummaging through half-frozen circuitry all day. She stands behind him, arms crossed, the curve of her body casting a long shadow across the floor. "I can't believe I'm stuck here with a human soldier," she mutters, though her tone lacks real. "Venom," he snorts softly. "Trust me, this isn't my ideal scenario either." He stands, turning to face her. They're close, too close. He sees the flicker of annoyance and something else in her eyes. The air crackles, and he's not sure if it's the heater malfunctioning or the current passing between them. "You keep looking at me like that," she says, voice dropping to that hypnotic register. "What do you see?" He doesn't flinch. "I see someone who's run from her empire. Someone who's more warrior than princess. Someone I can't decide if I want to throttle or trust." Her lips twitch into a half-smile. The feeling is mutual. The glow on her collarbones brightens, as though responding to her heightened emotions. He can't help the quickening of his pulse. She takes one step closer, her voice a low challenge. "Perhaps this alliance is doomed. We might kill each other before the night's through." He holds her gaze, his heart pounding. There's a dangerous tension between them that feels like the build-up to a fight, or something else. "Is that what you want?" he asks. Her eyes narrow and she steps even closer, until there's only a breath of space separating them. She's daring him, testing him. "I don't know," she whispers, the words barely audible. "What do you want, soldier?" He exhales slowly, aware of every inch of her body, of how his heartbeat thuds in his chest. "I want to survive," he says, voice low. Her gaze flicks over his face, and she lifts her chin in defiance. "Survival alone can't satisfy you," she challenges. "Otherwise you'd have turned me in or killed me by now." A flash of heat flares in his gut. He can't deny the truth in her words. "Maybe it's because I need you alive to get off this rock," he says, still meeting her stare. She smirks, leaning in so that her lips hover near his ear. "Keep telling yourself that," she breathes. Then she spins away, hair swirling behind her, the faint glow at her collarbones fading as she puts distance between them. He stands there, adrenaline coursing through his veins, every muscle tensed as though he's survived another skirmish. They settle again on opposite sides of the heater, her expression unreadable, his thoughts a whirlwind. Attraction threads through every hostile exchange, as if the tension between them is a fuse inching toward detonation. Neither acknowledges it openly, neither can completely deny it. The next day dawns with the storm finally abated. A pale sun filters through the cavern entrance, giving them a window of opportunity to venture outside. She suits up in whatever remnants of gear they have, and he helps gather the salvage for the trek back to the ship. They need to attempt repairs, see if they can coax the engines to life. The prospect of leaving this ice prison galvanizes them both. The walk back is arduous. The wind still bites, though not as fiercely as before. They arrive at the crash site to find the craft half buried in drifted snow. With grim determination, they clear the drifts and pry open the engine compartments. For hours they labor side by side, ignoring the cold, ignoring the ache in their limbs. She manipulates the delicate alien components with expert fingers while he handles the heavier tasks, lifting, prying, stabilizing. They bicker constantly, each blaming the other's inexperience whenever something goes wrong. Yet beneath the frustration lies a growing synergy. He adapts to her instructions. She adjusts her approach when he suggests a better method for cross-wiring the engine couplings. The day progresses and they're too occupied to notice how the tension between them shifts from raw hostility to something more charged, more intimate. At some point, she accidentally grazes his hand, her skin fever-warm against his. They lock eyes, the moment stretching. He thinks he sees confusion flicker over her features before she yanks her hand away. He tries to refocus on the repairs, pushing away the awareness that lingers in the wake of that brief contact. As dusk approaches, they manage to fire up a preliminary power cycle. One engine sputters, the other remains dead. The console inside the cockpit flickers, giving them minimal life support and partial thruster control, but nowhere near enough for a successful takeoff. Frustration weighs on them, and she kicks a piece of debris, fury etched into her regal features. He stands nearby, arms folded, mask of calm over his own disappointment. "You did well," he offers, surprising himself by complimenting her. She gives him a sharp look. "I don't need praise from you." Her tone is cold, but it lacks the venom from before. She sighs, letting her shoulders slump. "We're close, though. If we can find a replacement part for the damaged thruster, hooray, maybe we can get off the ground." She leans against the hull, sliding down to sit. The tired lines in her face betray her exhaustion. He sits near her, though still a safe distance away. The swirling wind outside the battered hatch carries a lonely howl. He glances at her, noticing again how her collarbones glow softly with each breath, like a living barometer of her emotions. She catches him looking and arches a brow. "What?" He looks away, jaw tight. "Nothing." She scoffs softly. "You've been staring ever since we met." A flicker of annoyance flares in him. "You're not exactly subtle, princess, with all that glowing and those pointed ears. Hard not to notice." Her eyes narrow. "Is that what you tell yourself?" She leans forward, voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "That it's just my alien traits you find intriguing?" He tenses, the spark between them igniting yet another confrontation. Their arguments feel like preludes to something else, something neither is ready to address. Before he can retort, the ship's console emits a shrill beep, indicating a drop. In power. She curses, pushing to her feet, brushing past him in the cramped quarters. He stands, too, feeling the static crackle whenever they're in proximity. They manage the power draw, shutting down non-essential systems to conserve energy. With night falling, they realize they'll be stuck in the craft until morning, forced to share the limited space. She retrieves the thermal blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders as she checks the engine readouts one last time. He hovers, uncertain where to position himself in the small cockpit. Her presence fills it, leaving no corner for him to escape the tension. Finally, she turns off the main overhead light, leaving only the soft glow of the emergency panel. She slides down beside the cockpit console, pulling the blanket tight. He settles against the opposite wall, arms wrapped around his knees. A lengthy silence unfolds, the hush broken only by the faint hum of the partial power supply. Eventually, he speaks, voice low. "We'll get that part, fix the thruster, we'll get out of here." She looks at him, an unreadable expression on her face. And then what? The question lingers, heavy with implication. They've never discussed what happens after they escape. She's the enemy, technically. He's sworn vengeance against her empire. She's on the run from her own mother. The lines have blurred so completely, he's not sure who stands on which side anymore. He doesn't have an answer, so he closes his eyes, feigning sleep. She studies him for a moment, then turns her gaze away, lost in her own thoughts. The temperature drops and she shivers under the blanket. Despite every internal warning, he feels compelled to help. Slowly he shifts closer, offering his own body heat. She stiffens, but he can see her reluctance warring with the cold. Finally she eases, allowing him to drape half the blanket over his broad shoulders too. Their bodies touch, the contact sending a jolt of awareness through both of them. She stiffens once more, refusing to look at him. He remains still, unsure if the next beat of his heart is from cold or something else. The tension is excruciating, each second stretching as they share warmth in silence. Eventually, fatigue claims them, and their breathing synchronizes. He feels the softness of her hair against his arm, her body molding subconsciously against his warmth. He tries to keep his mind numb, tries not to think about how natural it feels, despite everything telling him it's wrong. When dawn arrives, they stir, each pulling away as if the contact burned them. She tosses the blanket aside, clearing her throat. He avoids her gaze, busying himself with a systems check. "We should get moving," he mutters. She nods curtly, collecting her blade. Neither acknowledges the closeness they shared during the night, but something has shifted irreversibly. They exit the craft, braving the cold once more. Today, they decide to head south, where the scanner indicated possible wreckage. If they can find any thruster parts, they can attempt the repairs. The trek is grueling, an icy wind slicing at their faces. She takes the lead, using the portable scanner to navigate. He scans the horizon for threats. A pale sun climbs overhead, reflecting off endless expanses of snow and rock, rendering them little more than silhouettes trudging through a monochrome landscape. Time stretches, and they speak little. Necessity drives them forward, though so often they trade barbs or accusations. Their conflicting natures spark heated exchanges, but beneath the surface, a grudging camaraderie blossoms. He notices how whenever she stumbles, he instinctively reaches to steady her. She notices how he never complains, even when his lips go blue with cold or his hands shake from exhaustion. By midday, they reach a cluster of jagged metal shards. Protruding from the ice, a derelict vessel far older than her craft, likely from a previous conflict. They pry open rusted panels, rummaging through compartments in search of anything salvageable. She identifies a thruster coil that might match the one they need. Carefully they extract it, stowing it in a makeshift pack. Though they're tired, the small victory buoys their spirits. A flicker of something like warmth passes between them. When their eyes meet over the piece of equipment, they work well together, both determined to survive. But there's more than practicality in their combined efforts. It's an unspoken bond formed in adversity. On the trek back, a sudden snow squall rolls in, visibility dropping to near zero. The wind howls, slicing at exposed skin like knives. They huddle together, pressing on with heads bowed. He feels her shoulder bump his more than once, seeking balance or maybe reassurance. He loops an arm around her, guiding her forward when the gale threatens to knock them down. She doesn't fight him this time. Instead, she presses in, letting him shield her from the worst of the storm. Each step feels like a battle, a slow slog through a white abyss. When they finally reach the craft again, the storm has settled. To a dull roar. They stumble inside, half frozen, caked with ice. She collapses to her knees, gasping for breath, hugging the thruster coil to her chest as if it's her lifeline. He drops beside her, panting, numb fingers fumbling to close the hatch against the biting wind. For a moment they just sit there, hearts hammering, lungs burning. Then, with a trembling laugh that sounds more like relief than humor, she sets the coil on the floor. He finds the small container that once held their rations. It's almost empty, but there's enough to share a final meal. She nods gratefully when he hands her a ration bar, and they eat in silence, leaning against the interior wall. The tension that once defined their interactions is overshadowed by the sheer relief of making it back alive. After a few minutes, she wipes at her mouth, chin lifted. "We have the part. Let's fix this piece of junk and get off this rock." He stands, rolling his shoulders. "Lead the way, princess." They set to work, the cramped space of the engine bay forcing. Go them side by side. He hands her tools, she splices cables. When the thruster coil is successfully installed, they share a brief look. Mutual triumph flickers, followed by the unspoken knowledge that this is it. If it doesn't work, they're out of options. She climbs into the cockpit to power up the engines while he remains by the open access panel, monitoring. The ship groans, lights flickering. A deep hum resonates through the hull as the thruster spools up. He hears her voice from inside. "Engines at 30%, 50, it's holding." His pulse quickens. "Keep going." She pushes the output. The second thruster roars to life, vibrating beneath his feet. The entire craft shudders, stirring up dust and snow inside the cargo hold. He hears her triumphant laugh echo over the noise, a sound that sends a thrill through him. They've done it. They have power. He seals the engine bay and rushes into the cockpit. She's at the controls, eyes shining with victory. The console glows with stable readings for the first time since their crash. Her collarbones are illuminated. In that subtle luminescence, the excitement thrumming through her. He finds himself grinning back, a rare expression for him. She flicks a switch, guiding the craft into a hover. The ground drops away, swirling snow as the landing gear retracts. He stands behind her, bracing a hand on the seat to keep his balance in the sudden lift. Outside, the ice-laden wasteland stretches in all directions. They rise higher, the craft vibrating but holding steady. As they level out, she glances over her shoulder at him. The moment feels electric, the unrelenting tension that's shadowed. Them now coalescing into something almost inevitable. He can see the adrenaline in her eyes, the flush on her cheeks. Neither speaks. She pushes the throttle forward, the ship lurching into forward flight. They're free. For the first time, the swirling icy plains drop away behind them, replaced by open sky. Then the comm station crackles. He checks it, and a string of garbled transmissions in both human and alien languages flood the console. She stiffens, jaw clenching. They exchange a look. No words are necessary. Allies or enemies, they're not alone in this sector. She banks, the ship sharply, avoiding the direction of the strongest signals. He climbs into the co-pilot seat, scanning for any sign of pursuit. The sensors read multiple contacts in orbit. "We can't stay near the surface for long," he mutters. "And we can't break orbit without drawing attention." She tightens her grip on the controls. "We'll skirt the atmosphere, head for a quiet sector, and figure out our next move." She glances at him, an unspoken question in her gaze. "Are you staying?" He nods once, resolved. For now their fates are tangled. They push the ship to its limits, ascending through layers of turbulent air until the sky darkens, the horizon curving. Stars begin to speckle the void overhead. She levels off at a low orbit, checking the sensors. There's a small asteroid. Field about half a day's journey. We can hide there, maybe find a place to land if there's a suitable rock. He studies the readings. Then do it. But we'll need supplies, fuel, everything we don't have. She exhales shakily. One crisis at a time. Her voice trembles with exhaustion, though she masks it behind determination. She sets the course, and the ship hums steadily. Now that they're aloft, the adrenaline fades, leaving them with the stark truth of their precarious situation. They're fugitives, hunted by all sides, with no safe harbor in sight. They drift for hours in tense silence, the planet's curvature, slipping below them, eventually vanishing as they head into deeper space. She programs an autopilot sequence, then pushes back from the console, turning her seat to face him. He mirrors the movement, the cramped cockpit forcing their knees to brush. She studies him, expression guarded. "You have no reason to trust me," she says softly. "Nor I you. But we're here." She spreads her hands, as if presenting their unlikely partnership to him. He nods, meeting her gaze. "We survived together, that's enough for now." She tilts her head, pointed ears catching the dim glow of the cockpit lights. "And what about the war? The battles fought between our people? The blood spilled." He swallows hard, memories stirring. That hasn't disappeared, but right now the only thing that matters is survival. She considers his words, her gaze flicking to the floor. "I've spent my whole life believing I was destined to rule," she murmurs, almost to herself. "And I was taught your kind were beneath us. Yet here I am, grateful you held my hand when I almost fell to my death." He says nothing, but the weight of her admission fills the small space. A reluctant smile curves her lips, shadowed by fear and uncertainty. He feels an echo of that fear in his own chest. They've stumbled into a bond that neither foresaw, but neither can deny. She leans closer, voice catching on a whisper. "Why do I feel drawn to you?" It's a question she seems to hate asking, but she can't hold it back. Her collarbones glow brighter, betraying her vulnerability. He notices how her breath catches, how her eyes gleam with a mix of longing and defiance. He exhales shakily, searching for a safe answer. He finds none, so he settles on the truth. "I don't know," he admits, his voice low. "All I know is from the moment I saw you, I couldn't look away. Maybe it's that pride of yours, the way you refuse to kneel, or maybe it's just you." Her lips part, and he sees the conflict roiling behind her eyes. She was certain of her preferences, certain that men, even alien men, didn't stir her. Yet here she is, pinned by a feeling she can't rationalize. He feels the magnetic pull as she leans in, their breaths mixing in the charged air. When their lips finally meet, it isn't gentle or tentative. It's a clash, fueled by pent-up tension, desperation, and a lingering thread of anger. She grips the collar of his jacket, pulling him closer, and he wraps an arm around her waist. It's an embrace born of survival and the raw, primal spark that's been building since they first traded barbs. Her mouth is hot, demanding, her heartbeat a wild tattoo against his chest. He meets her ferocity with his own, a jolt of electricity surging through both of them. In that moment, they surrender to the inevitability that's been stalking them across battlefields, ice caverns, and the cramped cockpit of a stolen ship. Her nails scrape against his neck, and he grips her waist until she gasps. Their teeth clash, breath ragged, as if each is trying to dominate the other. It's a struggle for control, just as every moment between them has been. But there's no victor here, only the consuming hunger that breaks through their barriers. Eventually they tear apart, foreheads pressing together, breaths coming in ragged gulps. She trembles, eyes ablaze with emotion. "This is insane," she whispers, lips swollen from the force of their kiss. He nods, trying to steady his racing heart. "Completely," he agrees, his voice hoarse. Neither moves to pull away fully. They cling to each other like castaways, clinging to driftwood. She lifts a trembling hand, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Her eyes hold 1,000 questions, none of which she can articulate. He covers her hand with his own, pressing it to his cheek. The intimacy is startling after the violence of their kiss. It's a moment of genuine vulnerability, a fragile truce that might shatter at any second. Neither speaks for a long time. Outside, the stars pass by in silent witness, the hum of the ship's engines the only background to their ragged breathing. Finally she exhales, pulling back slightly. I can't promise you anything, she says, voice still trembling. This, war my empire, your people. We might be enemies again the moment we land. He nods, still cradling her cheek. I know. She closes her eyes, leaning into his touch for just a heartbeat, as though drawing strength. Then she sits back, forcing space between them. Her expression is conflicted, but there's a resolve in her gaze. We'll reach the asteroid field soon. We can hide there, gather our bearings, and decide what to do next. He rakes a hand through his hair, trying to calm the storm in his chest. Yeah, he mutters. That's good. The autopilot beeps, indicating a course correction. She turns back to the console, reasserting her composure, though he can see the slight tremor in her hands. He shifts to the co-pilot, seat scanning the readouts, heart still pounding. Their collision has changed the dynamic irrevocably. They're not just reluctant allies. They've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. Hours pass as they navigate. The tension remains, but it's different now, less venomous, more charged with the memory of their kiss. Occasionally their eyes meet, and a current of heat flickers. They're silent about it, both uncertain what it means, but neither regrets it in this moment. They slip into the asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks that rotate lazily in the star-studded void. She finds a stable orbit around one of the larger asteroids, parking the ship in the shadow of its rocky expanse. Here, sensors will have a harder time detecting them, giving them a chance to breathe. She powers down non-essential systems, the cockpit lights dimming. In the subdued glow, their gazes meet again, a magnetism lingering between them. You should rest, she says softly. I can monitor the sensors. He considers arguing but sees the exhaustion etched in her face. No, you rest, I'll keep watch. She draws a breath, about to refuse, but stops. Finally she nods. All right. She stands, moving to the ship's cramped living quarters. Narrow bunk behind the cockpit. He hears her settle, the rustle of fabric as she tries to find a comfortable position. He remains in the co-pilot seat, eyes on the sensor readouts, but his mind drifts to her. Sleep eludes him. The memory of their kiss, the feel of her body pressed against his. These thoughts gnaw at him. He's not sure if it's wise to let himself be drawn to her. She's a princess of a hostile empire. He's a soldier marked by vengeance. Their union seems doomed, yet every time he recalls the moment her eyes flickered with confusion and desire, he feels a pull stronger than fear. Eventually, a restless half-sleep overtakes him, and he slumps in the seat, the quiet beep of sensors lulling him. He's awakened by the sound of movement. She emerges from the bunk, hair tousled, eyes lidded with residual fatigue. She looks at him with a guarded softness that surprises him. I couldn't sleep, she murmurs, crossing to him. Anything on the sensors? He shakes his head. Clear, just drifting rocks. He stretches, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles. She hovers near him, the memory of their kiss palpable in the air. Neither of them addresses it directly. We can't hide here forever, she says at last, sinking into the pilot's seat. We need fuel, supplies, and eventually we'll have to face what comes next. He nods. We have a little time to figure out a plan. He hesitates, then tries to gauge her mood. Are you... She turns to him, eyes narrowing. Am I what? He sighs. Ready to talk about what happened between us? His question is quiet, sincere. She stiffens, but he sees her collarbones glow faintly. I don't regret it, she admits slowly, her voice tight. But it changes nothing about our situation. If my mother's forces find us, we're both dead. If your people find us, we're both prisoners. He leans forward, elbows on his knees. That's why we figure out a plan, together. Her gaze flicks to him, and he catches a trace of softness beneath her guarded exterior. Together, she repeats, as though testing the word. Then she nods, shifting her focus to the console. All right, soldier. Let's see what trouble we can stir up in this galaxy. A wry smile tugs at his lips. Wouldn't have it any other way, princess. She shakes her head in exasperation, but there's no malice in the gesture. The ice, final barrier between them has cracked. If not fully fallen, they're still two adversaries from opposing worlds, but they've found a fragile bridge in the shared heat of conflict and attraction. They'll move forward, forging an uncertain path. For now, it's enough. Over the next few days, they venture deeper into the asteroid field, scavenging anything they can from derelict craft or hidden caches. Each mission feels like a test, not just of survival skills, but of the bond growing between them. They fight side by side against rogue drones guarding old mining outposts. They patch up hull breaches caused by stray collisions with drifting rocks. They share dwindling rations, sometimes pressed so close together in the small bunk that they wake entangled, breath mingling in the dark. Their arguments continue, each exchange laced with the friction of two powerful wills. But in the midst of these verbal sparrings, intimacy brews like a storm. He becomes acutely aware of her presence, the subtle glow that dances across her collarbones whenever emotion stirs, the quiet hitch in her breath when his hand brushes her hip in the cramped corridors. One evening, after a particularly harrowing salvage mission, they collapse onto the bunk, both drenched in sweat from the manual labor of hauling heavy parts. She sprawls on her back, hair fanned out, chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. He sits at the edge, removing his boots, and for a moment the tension between them is thick. Without warning, she hooks a leg around his waist and pulls him down. He tumbles onto the narrow bunk, finding himself atop her, the minimal space. Forcing their bodies together, she smirks, eyes alive with a mixture of challenge and hunger. "You look tired," she purrs, voice dripping with mock concern. He braces his hands on either side of her head, returning her smirk. "I don't get tired so easily," he says, leaning in until their breaths mingle. She laughs softly, a low, throaty sound that sends a shiver down his spine. Then her lips crash into his, a fierce collision of pent-up emotion. It's a struggle for dominance, both of them vying for control. She bites his lower lip, a tiny punishment for his earlier arrogance, and he retaliates by gripping her hips, pinning her against the bunk. They roll, tangling in sheets and sweat, the line between aggression and desire blurred. Each kiss is a challenge, each touch a test of how far they can push. Her nails rake his back, drawing a hiss from him. He tangles a hand in her hair, pulling just enough to tilt her head back, exposing the graceful line of her throat. She gasps, arching, against him, the glow in her collarbones flaring brightly. Eventually they relent, breathing hard, entwined in the small bunk. The air in the cabin is suffused with the heat of their bodies, the scent of shared exertion. She presses her forehead to his, eyes closed, swallowing convulsively as she tries to catch her breath. "You are infuriating," she whispers, a tremor in her voice. He gives a short laugh, arms tightening around her waist. Likewise, neither moves to separate. They lie there, the flicker of overhead lights casting shadows that play across their spent forms. Their connection is undeniable now, forged in the fires of conflict and tempered by the raw urgency of survival. In the days that follow, their intimate clashes become more frequent, though they rarely speak openly about what they're doing. It's as though each stolen moment is another battlefield, each embrace another negotiation of boundaries. She remains proud, commanding, unpredictable. He remains steadfast, fiercely protective when danger looms. They find a precarious balance, neither yielding entirely, neither pulling away. Their partnership is tested when they encounter a patrol of human ships scanning the asteroid field. She spots them first on the sensors, cursing softly. He tenses, glancing at her. "What do we do?" She bites her lip, pupils narrowing. "If they catch us, it won't matter that you're human. They'll see a princess of the enemy empire and assume you're a traitor. We need to hide." He nods, swiftly altering the ship's course to tuck behind a large asteroid. The stealth modifications they've salvaged offer minimal protection, but it might be enough to evade scanning. They kill all non-essential power. In the dark, they float in silence, listening to the distant hum of the enemy patrol's engines. She stands behind him, tense, ready to bolt if needed. He can sense her heartbeat in the quiet, can almost taste her anxiety. His own heart hammers. Slowly, the patrol signal drifts away, leaving them unscathed. They exchange a silent look in the dark, relief mingling with realization. They truly are alone, cut off from both their peoples. Once the patrol is gone, she exhales, pressing her forehead to the metal bulkhead. He comes up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. She spins, burying her face against his chest. For a moment she trembles, the fear and tension letting go. He wraps his arms around her, surprised by the surge of protectiveness that wells up inside him. She recovers quickly, pushing away, cheeks flushed. "I'm fine," she mutters. He nods, letting her preserve her pride. But the vulnerability she showed, however brief, cements the bond they're forging. Finally, they stumble upon a plan. Locate a neutral station or black market hub where they can resupply. Maybe alter the ship's transponder to mask her identity. It's risky, but they're out of options. She works on forging false credentials, using codes gleaned from her empire's archives. He modifies the ship's drives to reduce their trace signature. Through every setback and victory, their relationship intensifies. Heated arguments end in rough kisses. Moments of shared victory lead to fierce embraces. Each instance of danger draws them closer, the adrenaline fueling their attraction. At night, in the cramped bunk, they lie entwined, speaking in hushed tones about uncertain futures. Yet a question looms. When the war inevitably catches up to them, will they stand together or be forced back into their old loyalties? Neither wants to ask it. Neither wants to shatter the fragile equilibrium they've found. They cling to the present, a stolen moment of passion in a galaxy that has branded them enemies. The day comes when they spot a small station hidden near a gas giant known for harboring smugglers and mercenaries. She lands the ship, tension crackling. They don't know what to expect. They move in tandem, descending the ramp with weapons discreetly at their hips. The station's corridors are dingy, filled with suspicious eyes. Together, they navigate the labyrinth of corridors in search of someone who can help them forge new identities and slip past the war's front lines. After tense negotiations with a shady black market dealer, they secure the documentation at an exorbitant price. She hands over alien trinkets, presumably valuable relics from her empire. He trades away the last of his prized ammunition reserves, all to buy their freedom. When they leave, the dealer gives them a knowing smirk, glancing between them with the shrewd look of someone who sees more than he's told. They return to the ship, triumphant but uneasy. The lines between them and the rest of the galaxy are now severed. They truly have only each other. As they prepare to depart, the station's klaxons blare. They rush to the cockpit to see a new presence in orbit, an Imperial cruiser belonging to her mother's fleet. She pales, and he feels his heart lurch. "They found us," she breathes, hands clenching on the controls. He slides into the co-pilot seat, scanning the sensors. "We can run," he says. But even as he speaks, he sees that the cruiser is launching fighters to block escape routes. She sets her jaw, powering up the engines. "Then we fight," she declares. Her voice holds a steady resolve, a far cry from the bitter cynicism of before. She's made her choice, and it lies with him. He nods, adrenaline surging. Together. They punch the engines, blasting free of the docking clamps. The station's turrets light up, targeting the fighters as well. Clearly, the station has no love for Imperial interference. It's a chaotic melee in orbit, lasers and plasma bolts crisscrossing. She weaves the ship through the storm of fire, while he mans the weapons, taking potshots at any fighter that crosses their path. The cruiser looms, massive and menacing, but its gunners hesitate to fire full power near the station, not wanting to incite a full-scale conflict with the smugglers. Seizing the chance, she spots an opening, angling the ship toward a gap in the fighter formation. With a roar of thrusters, they surge through, the hull rattling under near-miss blasts. One enemy fighter clings to their tail, peppering the aft shields with bursts of plasma. She jinks left, then right, but can't shake it. Gritting his teeth, he swivels the turret, heart pounding. The fighter's pilot is skilled, matching every feint. She curses, flipping the ship in a gut-wrenching roll that slams them both into their seats. Finally, he finds a shot, pressing the trigger. The turret fires, striking the fighter's cockpit. It spirals, detonating in a flash of light. She whoops, but the moment of victory is cut short when a second wave of fighters emerges from the cruiser's hangar. Alarms blare, the console lighting. Up with contact signals. She spares him a brief, intense look. They both know they can't outrun the entire fleet forever, but they can try. She pours on the speed, the drive core shrieking in protest. The ship streaks away, dipping into the shadow of the gas giant. The cruiser attempts to follow, but the gas giant's dense atmosphere scrambles their long-range sensors. They slip into a swirling miasma of clouds and storms, hoping to evade pursuit. Inside the roiling atmosphere, turbulence slams them from all sides. She wrestles the controls, sweat beading on her brow. He keeps his gaze on the sensors, calling out readings. Lightning arcs outside, illuminating the cockpit in bursts of eerie glow. They press deeper, losing themselves in the planet's swirling storms. At last, the sensors show no immediate pursuers. She reduces thrust, letting the ship drift on. Thermals. The storms still buffet them, but they find a pocket of calmer air near the planet's equator. For a moment, they just breathe, hearts pounding, sweat slicking their foreheads. She slumps in the pilot's seat, exhaling hard. He reaches out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he murmurs. She turns to him, exhaustion and relief in her eyes. Neither has to say that they only survived this long because they're together. Slowly he helps her out of the seat, guiding her to the bunk. She collapses onto it, pulling him down with surprising strength. In the flickering light of the failing overhead lamp, they cling to each other. Their lips find one another, and the frantic energy of the dogfight translates into a desperate, fervent kiss. There's no hesitation now, no illusions that this is merely convenience or ephemeral lust. They've risked everything for each other. She threads her fingers through his hair, voice trembling when they finally break apart. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispers, surprising them both with the confession. He cups her cheek, brushing away a stray tear she won't admit she shed. His own eyes burn with unshed grief for what he lost before, for the men in his squad. Yet here in her arms he finds a flicker of hope he thought dead. Their embrace grows heated, frantic, as though they're trying to affirm life in the face of so much danger. Clothes are shed, hands roam, and the cockpit's swirling lights dance over the curves of her alien form. She emits a soft glow that syncs with her heightened pulse, painting their union in shimmering color. He meets her every movement with equal fervor, their bodies tangling in the cramped bunk. Each sigh, each gasp, resonates like a victory over the despair that has haunted them. After, they lie together, breath slowing, hearts pounding in tandem. She traces a finger along a scar on his arm, her expression pensive. "What happens now?" she asks softly, voice carrying a vulnerability that pierces him. He draws a shaky breath, tightening his hold around her. "We survive," he says simply. "And maybe we make something new. Something beyond this war." She lifts her gaze, eyes shimmering. "A dreamer," she teases, but there's affection in her tone. "I never imagined this. Not with you. Not with any man, to be honest." He smirks softly. "I never imagined wanting an alien princess. Life's full of surprises." She laughs quietly, pressing her face against his chest. The storm outside rages, but here, cocooned in the warmth of each other, they find a fragile peace. They've taken everything from each other's worlds, anger, prejudice, attraction, survival, and forged it into a bond that neither anticipated, but both now refuse to abandon. Eventually, they drift asleep. When they awaken, the storms outside have calmed. She checks the sensors, confirming the Imperial cruiser is still in the system, searching. He helps reroute more power to engines and life support, preparing for the next step in their odyssey. There's no safe harbor for them in human or alien space, so they'll carve their own path. The galaxy is vast, full of hidden corners and uncharted routes. They'll keep running until they find a place to breathe freely. She points at a section of the nav map, far from known trade routes. "Here," she suggests, "empty space. We can start there, pick up any signals or leads along the way." He nods, trusting her judgment. They power up the thrusters, lifting out of the gas giant's swirling atmosphere. Once free of the tempest, they jump to faster-than-light travel. slipping away from the Empire's clutches and the humans who would brand him a traitor. The ship hums, carrying them into the unknown. In the hush of the cabin, she settles into his arms again, pressing her ear to his chest. He strokes her hair, the tangle of black strands oddly comforting. They know the war still rages behind them, that alliances remain precarious, but for now they have each other. In the boundless darkness, a single point of warmth glows between them, defying all logic, all boundaries. Days turn into weeks as they traverse little-known sectors. Time and again they avoid patrols from both sides. She barters her knowledge of alien star charts. He uses his soldier's instincts to navigate dangerous choke points. Their trust in each other grows, solidified by each crisis they survive. In stolen moments of calm, they share more than just passion. They share fragments of their past, acknowledging the tragedies and betrayals that shaped them. He reveals the loss of his squad, the fury that drove him to keep fighting. She confesses the cruelty of her mother's court, the claustrophobic traditions that never allowed her to explore her true self. They speak in hushed tones, pressed, together under a shared blanket in the cockpit, always half listening for the next threat. With every confession, the distance between them shrinks. One quiet evening, the sensors remain blessedly empty. She lays her head on his shoulder as he pilots through uncharted space. "I was so certain I could never feel this way," she whispers. "I told myself my desires were fixed, that men held no appeal. Yet here I am." He sets the autopilot, turning to face her. "I don't presume to understand it all, but I'm glad you're here." She smiles, faint and genuine, and he kisses her gently, a quiet affirmation of the bond that neither of them can fully explain. Soon, they pick up faint signals from a remote outpost rumored to accept anyone, no questions asked, so long as they pay. It's the kind of place that might offer them shelter, a chance to gather resources. They plot a course, hearts brimming with cautious hope. But as they approach, they discover the outpost under siege by a rogue faction, pirates or mercenaries. It's chaos all over again, and they realize there will be no safe haven easily found. They watch from a distance, cloaking their ship's signature. Erin Tal's grip tightens on his arm. "If we go there, we get pulled into another battle. If we don't, we keep running without supplies." He sets his jaw, scanning the battered station. "We're low on everything. We can't keep running forever. Maybe we can negotiate or fight our way through." She exhales, the glow on her collarbones pulsing with frustration. "Then we try. One more time." Despite the risk, they approach, weaving through debris fields to avoid detection. The battered station's defenses are nearly gone, but a handful of defenders still hold out. She looks at him, eyebrows raised. He nods. "We help them," he says simply. "Maybe they'll help us in return." She arcs an ironic smile. "Their hero streak is showing, soldier." He grins wryly, though there's a tinge of bitterness in it. "Just doing what feels right." They power up weapons, descending upon the attacking ships. It's another dogfight, fierce, chaotic. Side by side, they eliminate several raiders, driving the rest to retreat. The station's battered defenders hail them, offering docking in gratitude. She sets down carefully amidst smoking wreckage, and as the ramp lowers, they step out together, battered but unbowed. The station's people eye them warily, but a tense truce forms when they realize these two strangers just saved their lives. Erin Tal's regal bearing and alien features draw curious stares, while Kieran's silent, guarded presence warns onlookers not to get too close. The station leader, a gruff older man, offers them shelter, basic repairs, and a place to rest. They accept, though they remain vigilant. That night they find a quiet corner in the station's rundown living quarters. She leans against him, exhaustion etched in her features. He wraps an arm around her shoulders, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Neither speaks of tomorrow. Neither wants to break the fragile sense of belonging they've discovered in each other. Days pass in relative calm. The station's people are grateful, offering them scant supplies in exchange for protection. She helps them repair an old generator, using her knowledge of alien tech. He lends a soldier's discipline, organizing defenders to guard against another attack. It's a glimpse of a life they never thought possible, contributing, protecting, without being at war. One evening, after a day of work, they return to their ship, which has been patched up enough to be space-worthy again. They stand on the docking platform, watching the stars. She slips a hand into his, and he squeezes gently. "Ready?" he asks quietly. "We can stay a while longer if you want." She considers it, gazing at the distant void. "No," she answers softly. "It's time to move on. My mother won't stop searching, and your people might be on our trail. We need to stay ahead." He nods, tugging her close. "Where to?" She smiles, a glimmer of possibility shining in her eyes. "Anywhere that's ours, not theirs." They board the ship. The engines rumble, the thrusters lifting them off the station's pad. The station's leader salutes as they depart, silently grateful for the respite the two mysterious allies provided. As the ship glides into the darkness, she charts a course to an unclaimed region of space. He sets the autopilot, then joins her by the cockpit window. Outside, the stars shimmer, endless. She leans against him, resting her head on his shoulder, and he brushes a gentle hand across her hair. "This might not be easy," he murmurs. She lifts her gaze, meeting his with a fierce intensity. "Nothing worth having ever is." They share a tender, lingering kiss that holds all the promises words cannot convey. Their bond has been tested by ice, by fire, by war, and still they stand together. Two souls once certain of their separate paths, now forging a new one hand in hand. At last, they break the kiss. The ship hums beneath them, carrying them onward. In that moment, both know the future is uncertain, but the choice they've made is unmistakably theirs. He glances at her, recalling the first time he saw her, shackled and defiant. She smirks slightly, remembering how easily she'd dismissed him as just another brute. Now they share a connection beyond explanation, a union forged in defiance of everything that sought to keep them apart. They turn to the console, eyes bright with resolve. No more running from fate. No more being pawns in someone else's war. They will claim their destiny in a galaxy vast enough for them to carve out a sanctuary, together. And as the stars stretch before them, neither doubts they will do whatever it takes to protect this fragile, primal love that defies borders, empires, and the expectations they once held so dear. They engage the faster-than-light drive, the cockpit flooding with the kaleidoscopic colors of hyperspace. She reaches for his hand again, and he laces his fingers through hers. In the roar of the engines and the rush of the cosmic lights, their hearts beat in unison, a quiet, powerful promise echoing through the void. They are no longer defined by war. They are no longer controlled by prejudices or the illusions of impossible boundaries. They have found something real in the unlikeliest of places, something that dwarfs fear. Let the stars bear witness. Together, they move forward, and the final vestiges of who they used to be fade into the cosmic dust behind them. Their journey ends here, yet in another sense, it has only just begun.